Good morning, everybody. Friday morning's devotion. We're in the book of Genesis. The last character we've been discussing is the man Joseph. Joseph has taught us much about passing certain tests in life. Remember, he passed first of all the test of slavery, being taken from the highest place of privilege into nothingness, and yet he trusted the sovereignty of God, that God knew what was best for him. He passed the test. And then he passed the test of stewardship when he did so well with what his new boss Potiphar gave to him. And Potiphar was just so happy with him until somebody lied and he ended up in prison. But we remember the words of Jesus, "Well done, good and faithful servant," or "good and faithful steward." That's what we want to hear at the end of our lives. And then we spoke at the end of that on Thursday, we spoke about the place of the prison, place of subjection. Somebody lied about him. This is the unfairness and the injustice of life. And for there he held on to the promises of God, I'm sure. And he practiced the presence of God that helped him to do so well at that time of being in a prison. Today, I want to talk about what I would consider to be Joseph's highest hour, taking nothing away from his response to the prison and to subjection and to slavery and to all of those other things. But I'm convinced that Joseph's highest hour was the hour that he forgave his brothers. Man, can you imagine being him? Having had your life so trashed by your brothers, having had your life so messed up with them from one thing to another, and yet Joseph never begrudged all that he went through for a very good reason. I'll give it to you at the end. But if you look at what he is now in this place of requiring to forgive. Remember we spoke, I think it was last week, we ended last week by talking about asking for forgiveness. I don't think we talk about that enough. But now we're talking about being forgiving to those who have wronged us. And to forgive others is just a remarkable, beautiful trait of people who walk with an attitude of forgiveness. And I guess that's a great way to describe Joseph's life. He walked with an attitude of forgiveness. He prepared to forgive way in advance of needing to forgive. He's a great lesson to us. But there are 4 things, and I hope you'll just remember these 4 things. We've done them before, way back, go look at them. But let me remind you of the 4 things that make up good forgiveness. The first thing, in order for forgiveness to happen, don't wait for an apology. If you're waiting for somebody to apologize to you for what they have done wrong to you, you're probably never going to ever forgive them, because they're probably never ever going to apologize. That's the first thing. Never wait for an apology. Second thing, we need to learn what it means to forgive and to forget. Now, I'm not talking about what's happening in our head. I'm talking about what's going on in our heart. When we forgive with our hearts, the emotions die. And it's beautiful because Joseph tells us this. He says in chapter 41, he talks about his firstborn son. He named him Manasseh because Manasseh means God has caused me to forget all of my trouble. He'd had a lot of trouble involving a lot of people, but Manasseh means God has caused me, through present circumstances, through my present mindset, to forget all my troubled years. That's another great characteristic of those who know how to forgive. Academically, you can't turn this thing off. You haven't got a delete button in your brain to delete it, but you can certainly forgive, and you can learn what it means to forgive from your heart, even if you can't from your head. The third thing, in order for forgiveness to happen, is the innocent need to assume the guilt of the guilty. That means that you, as the innocent, need to take responsibility for the healing of this relationship. Don't sit there getting angry. Don't sit there getting the victim's mentality and being angry and being miserable, and you can waste a lot of time, emotionally, energy, and your health is going to suffer if you do that. Own this thing. Even though you're not to blame for the sin, even though you're not to blame, you can still take responsibility for the healing of that relationship. Giving blame might be true, it might be the truth, but it's certainly not helpful by doing that. So we need to take responsibility for the healing of the relationship, even if you don't have to take the blame. And then the last thing is probably the toughest thing of all. You've got to prove your forgiveness by doing something good for the person you've just forgiven. Look at Joseph. Man, he had all the power in the world. He's the prime minister of the land. He could have had his brothers killed. He could have had them wiped out, but he didn't. He went through all those aspects of forgiveness, and then the last thing, he gave them the best land, the best farmland in the entire area. He said, I'm going to prove to you my forgiveness by blessing you with something really special. Kind of like Jesus. Jesus didn't just take our sin away, he gave us heaven as well. And so Jesus didn't just forgive us, but he gives us something special to prove that we're forgiven. We get to have heaven as well. You say, how do you do that? This is we've set the bar so high for forgiveness. How do we jump that high? Well, he says to us in chapter 50, verse 20, he understands again the sovereignty of God. Remember we spoke about that the other day? That when you live and see life through the lens of the sovereignty of God, you see things completely differently. Here's proof of that. He lived in the knowledge of the sovereign will of God. Good or bad, God's will and his purpose will be fulfilled in my life. He says to his brothers, he says, you aimed this at me for evil, but guys, don't worry. God intended it for good. I don't have a better statement that could epitomize the beauty of what this understanding the sovereignty of God is all about, and what forgiveness can be through the lens of the sovereignty and the purpose of God in your life. So today, it's Friday. Man, I'm inviting you just to look through your life. Have a look at some of the people that you're still miserable with. Learn what it means to forgive. Go through the process. And I'm praying for you because I've got to do the same thing. Have a fantastic weekend. And I hope that we can see you on Sunday because we're opening our new facility. It's going to be awesome. I really hope that you can make it. Thank you guys. Have a fantastic weekend. Cheers.